Good afternoon and hello everyone. Welcome to the second webinar of WLA's Summer Water Webinar Series. We will just take a few minutes here to let everyone get settled. We've got about 140 or some odd registrants coming in today. So it does just take a moment or two for everyone to join us today in the Zoom room. Thank you for taking an hour out of your busy lives and joining us on this Friday afternoon. For anyone that might have to leave early or is interested in rewatching this, or if you know anyone in your network that wasn't able to join us, we will be recording this and we'll be sending it out around the Wednesday mark of next week. So do keep an eye out for that. Just wanted to let you know that when you signed up for today's webinar, you did automatically become a WLA member. It's a free membership, but we do rely on support from members like you. So please consider making a donation. You can learn more about what it means to be a member of WLA and the work that we do by exploring our website. You can find that in the link in our chat. Thanks to Morgan just adding it there. And as folks continue to join us today, again, good morning, or good afternoon, I should say, and thank you for joining us. We'll get started here in just a moment. And we are really excited for today's programming. If this is your first WLA Water webinar, welcome. If you are a repeat visitor, it's great to see you again. So again, we're super excited to get underway here in just a moment, and we will begin here momentarily. Okay, well, I think we've reached a pretty good critical mass here, so let's begin. Again, welcome. My name is Jake Lebsack, and I'm the Western Water Resources Coordinator for Western Landowners Alliance. Again, I'd like to welcome you all to the second webinar of our Summer Water Webinar Series. Today's program is entitled Alternative Forage, the Challenges and Opportunities. So in just a few short moments, we'll learn about the challenges and opportunities of growing alternative forages and experimenting with drought-resilient crops. So whether you're a farmer, a rancher, or someone really just interested in a water-smart future for the West, we do hope that today's program is a helpful explainer to traditional forage alternatives. This webinar does follow on the heels of our first of the series, which happened in June, where we heard from scientists and irrigators about the benefits of flood irrigation. If you're interested in watching that webinar recording or reading our written recap, you can learn more about that program using the link that Morgan just shared out in the chat. So please do explore that. We hope that you find that informative. Again, I mentioned it at the top of the call, but just a brief reminder that we will be recording this webinar, and it will be available for anyone who missed it, or if anyone wants to share it within their networks. We'll have that to you in the middle of next week. So do keep an eye on your email inbox. And now I'd like to introduce our WLA staff here. We've got Linda Poole, the Working Lands Program Director, Lewis Wirtz, WLA's Communications Director, and Morgan Wagoner, the Colorado River Basin Stewardship Coordinator for Western Landowners Alliance. I'd now like to pass it over to Linda, who will provide a brief introduction to WLA and our work. Linda, please.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are, and welcome to this webinar. As Jake said, I'm Linda Poole, and I'm the Working Lands Program Director here at Western Landowners Alliance. You might also connect with us through our Working Wild Challenge. You might know us as working a lot with predators and endangered species, and with supporting local groups as they try to come together to work on profitability, to work on creating a future for all of us who care about the West. WLA is uniquely suited to this because we are landowner founded and landowner led, and we work across the West to sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species. We have over 13,000 members right now. We're growing very quickly. I hope that number's not too far out of date, who together manage over 14 million acres of both deeded and leased public lands across the West. And we welcome into our membership a broad spectrum of land interests, ownership types, and political perspectives. And in fact, our membership spans the entire political spectrum. But what really brings us together is a love of the land and a desire to keep it whole and healthy for the benefit of people and wildlife. So our work at the Western Landowners Alliance focuses on empowering landowners and land managers with the knowledge, the resources, and the public policies that they need to be successful through challenging times. We're pragmatic and solutions oriented in our approach because we too are landowners and land managers. When the topic of water comes up, being pragmatic is so important because there's many solutions, many options that are out in the universe for us to look at. But what we're really trying to focus in on in this series and in our programs are types of solutions that can work for us as landowners on the ground. We promote landowner-led and place-based collaboratives and respectful communications to improve public dialogue on complex land and natural resource management issues, working always to increase understanding of the value of private working lands and of land stewardship by landowners on both public and private lands. WLA membership is free. It's available to anybody as a service to the landowner community, and membership comes with a variety of benefits that keep you current on news and information on resources and on project opportunities. And one of the real perks of being part of the community is to be able to get our periodic magazine on land. The most recent issue was completely about water and has a lot of ideas that you might be able to use as landowners. So we just want to encourage you to participate in WLA. We hope you'll join us as a member. Help us spread the word that we are here to support you as landowners and land stewards in caring for the West that we all love. So thanks again for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Linda. So today's webinar will feature 3 speakers, followed by a brief Q&A session. If you do have a question for today's panelists, which we sure hope you do, please use the question and answer function in Zoom. And if you enjoy today's program, please do consider registering for the remaining 2 events in this 4-part series, where we'll explore the topics of healthy forests and the role they play in our watersheds, and opportunities for reversing desertification through regreening. All of that info can be found on our Water in the West page and on our website as a whole, which Morgan just shared in the chat there. So please do explore that. And we hope to see you in July and August for those next programs. Again, we're really excited to have about 140 of you joining us today. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this Friday afternoon. We really are here to serve you as landowners, as Linda mentioned, and we do hope this webinar provides some helpful information as it relates to water and the work you all do as stewards of the land. So with that being said, we'd love to know who you are, where you are, what your affiliations might be. So do introduce yourself if you feel so inclined. You can do that in the chat. And just a reminder that we will have the chat reserved for introductions right now and for Morgan to share helpful resources. And please direct your questions to the Q&A function of Zoom. Now, before we get started, I did just want to say one brief note about today's topic of alternative forage. And that is that while we recognize that growing these crops isn't necessarily always a water-saving practice, and there's much more research on water consumption to be done, and we understand that the costs associated with transitioning crops can be prohibitive for some producers, we understand that producers across the West have diverse needs and that certain methods are simply best suited for some places and not for others. We recognize the many benefits of various water management decisions. And the purpose of these webinars is really just to simply share information and provide an opportunity for landowners and experts to exchange knowledge and stories. So with that being said, it's now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We've got Greg Peterson, Landon Wilson and his father Brian, and Phil Brink. We'll first be hearing from Greg Peterson, who grew up in Littleton, Colorado, where he still lives after living around the world. Greg received a master's in political economy of resources from the Colorado School of Mines and worked as a teacher, previously to becoming the executive director of the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. For the past few years, Greg has been knee-deep in working with farmers and ranchers, learning more about water, agriculture, Colorado, and the digestive habits of cattle. He spends his free time growing vegetables on his small farm, learning to hate hail and bindweed, don't we all? Thanks so much, Greg, for joining us today. We'll then hear from Landon and his father, Brian. Landon is a 5th-generation farmer in Montezuma County and a full-service irrigator. His passion for farming brought him back to the area after attending Colorado State University, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in agribusiness. Landon enjoys farming alongside his dad, Brian, who also joins us here today, on their irrigated and dryland fields. The Wilsons also received funding through the Colorado Ag Water Alliance's drought resiliency program to experiment with lower water crops like wheat and barley. We look forward to hearing you guys speak, and thanks again for joining us. And then we'll have Phil Brink wrap it up for us. And Phil is a conservation scientist and owner of Brink Inc., which provides compliance assistance to animal feeding operations and soil and water conservation assistance to the ag industry. He also serves as the consulting coordinator of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association's Ag Water Network and a partner to the Colorado Ag Drought Advisors and Colorado Ag Water Alliance. Phil holds a master's degree in environmental science with a water and hydrology emphasis. He's an environmental professional certified through the National Academy of Board Certified Environmental Professionals and an NRCS technical service provider. Now, with all that out of the way, I'm excited to pass the floor to our first speaker, Greg Peterson, to tell us about the Colorado Ag Water Alliance and the work it's doing to support drought resiliency projects like growing these alternative forages. So, Greg, I'll pass it over to you now. Thanks so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Jake, for inviting me here, and thank you, everybody, for attending. I'm Greg Peterson, and I'll get my slides up. I'm the director of the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. We're an association of about 15 different ag organizations throughout the state, and I have a board member representing each of those organizations, and our focus is really to support irrigated agriculture. And the past few years, we've actually, for the first time, been doling out funds in what we call our drought resilience projects for farmers and ranchers in Colorado. And those are, some of those are for soil practices, livestock management, innovative irrigation practices, and some of those are also for alternative forages and crops. And I think I wanted, as Jake mentioned earlier, it's like, well, these aren't for everywhere. And often, I mean, in Colorado, where we're really seeing people experiment with these crops is frankly because they don't have an alternative. I mean, they don't have a choice. In places like the Rio Grande, the Republican River Basin, and parts of the Western Slope, where the long-term outlook of the water supply is it's going to be less. And that's really where we're seeing a lot of interest and people involved in this in the ground right now. So before I get into the work that we're doing, I just want to mention he's not able to join us today. But really, we're really following a lot of the work that's being done by Paul Bruchet right here and his neighbors up in Grand County in the Kremling area. They're known as the irrigators in the lands and vicinity of Kremling. And there are about a dozen families up there that irrigate off the Colorado River, and they've been involved in a bunch of innovative projects the past 10 years. And one of those is they're high elevation cow-calf operations, a lot of flood irrigated meadows, some sprinklers. And really what they've been doing the past few years is, I mean, these fields are dominated by smooth brome grass, which if you're familiar with it, you know it has smooth brome really in these high elevation meadows. It develops this thatch layer or this sod layer that really limits production and increases consumptive use. And when you're applying fertilizer, you have to put more on. And they've been literally ripping that out in either with heavy equipment like a power harrow, or they've been or fallowing and then cultivating the land. After that, then they've been planting, growing warm season grasses, crops that we'll talk about, kernza, sandfoin, silphium, bird's foot, trefoil, all these different grasses. And they've been doing this on a pretty large scale. I think one of Paul's neighbors just plowed up 120 acres and this fall and has a crop of sandfoin coming in. So, and this is an area where I mentioned where, I mean, they're right on the Colorado, up in the headwaters, and they're seeing some dramatic decreases in stream flow and like they've never seen before. And so this is their way to adapt and hopefully maintain their community going into the future. But we're really, I mean, when it comes to the cutting edge of this kind of work, this is the group that we're really trying to follow and learn a lot from. So here's a map, and you can go to our website. We've got a bunch of projects throughout the state, and we decided that we needed a fund of money that is easy for farmers and ranchers to apply for and manage, not a lot of complicated paperwork, and really for them to experiment and try. Because if you expect farmers and ranchers to to take a risk and just lose money to try to grow other crops or forages, they're not going to do. And you really need to provide this safety net so that they can experiment and not literally lose the farm in the process. And our average project is only about $13,000, so it's not a lot of money, but it's easy to use, it's flexible, and it's been really helpful. And with every one of these projects, we're collecting data, getting information, and some of these we're already going into a second year in quite a few of these projects. So I'm going to just talk about a few of these projects, and then also just some larger issues and opportunities with alternative forages. And some of these projects really capture those obstacles we're running into. So the Ute Mountain Ute Farm and Ranch, right in the southwestern corner of Colorado in Montezuma County, they've been they're in the second year of growing kernza and sandfoin. And kernza is a perennial wheatgrass, sandfoin a perennial legume, and started in 2023. And they were planting this in a land that had been fallowed since, I believe, 2021. They're on a water system with the Dolores project off the Dolores River, where not only them, but all the farmers on that system have had just severe shortages in water the past few years, before last year. And so they were planning in previously fallowed land, bringing pivots back online that hadn't been used in a couple of years, and ended up having lots of weed issues, and there was no haying or grazing. And this is something that I think a lot of, if a funder is doing this, they need to really be prepared. I mean, between an issue like this, hail, I mean, I have one project this year where the agronomist, somebody shot up his house with a rifle, and they can't find their agronomist right now. These things happen in rural America, and it's like, okay, well, let's do what we can and go again next year. And so they didn't hay or graze because they didn't want to damage either of the crop. They didn't want to take anything from the crops yet. And then started off this year, after experimenting, finding a good herbicide that would work. And they're planning to hay or graze this year, and we're really going to get some good data. But so and in order for them to do this, I mean, we're literally covering all of their costs. And that's what it takes to get people to experiment with these kinds of crops. And it sometimes takes multiple years to even get some data. We've got another project in southwestern Colorado with Pueblo Seed and Food Company. And they're a small seed processing distribution center down there. And they did trials of nearly 50 species of grains, legumes, and they're really trying to collect data on each of these, everything from yields to, wow, which ones have real issues with pests. And that was really helpful. And after a year, they're focusing on 10 varieties. And this year they're contracting with local farmers. They're increasing the seed stock for about 5 to 10 of those varieties, which is another issue in some places. To get those original seeds, they were sourcing them all over the world. And there really isn't a large seed stock of some of those. And they're also working on developing products and really getting some nutrition, yield, water consumption data for this year. And that one, I believe that is what's called Dragon's Claw millet, which is one of the really promising crops that they had. And that's a picture right there. So there's, when we're really talking about these, at least the conclusion I'm coming to is we can find people to grow this stuff. And given a few years, they can grow a pretty good stand of these crops. But then it gets into these larger questions that honestly, I don't have answers for. And it's like, well, where are we going to sell these alternative forages? And the easiest answer for that is, well, like our friends up in Kremling, they're all cow-calf operations. So as long as the forages really meet the right nutritional values, they've got their end consumer right there. And so that's one, but what about for people who are just forage producers who don't have the livestock there in their own operations or next door? I mean, and I think Landon and his father Brian will get into this of, well, that's a lot more difficult. And do we need to find those markets for them? Do we need to create those markets for them? I mean, and at first it sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but do we need more cows in parts of the Colorado River Basin? Because so that instead of growing something that is more higher consumptive use, people can maybe grow a forage that is ideal for beef cattle. That might be an answer. Do we need to produce like a livestock facilities in certain areas, processing centers? And I mean, I think Landon also, or Jake brought up this too about, are there protections for your water right when you are using a crop that uses less water? Yes and no. In Colorado, we do. If you go out and grow a crop that uses less water, and the value of your water right is your historical consumptive use over 20, 30 years. And if you use less water for that year, you're going to have a lower value. And if you just do that on your own and you expect that to be protected, it's not going to be. It has to be part of what's called a water conservation plan that's approved by the Water Conservation Board. And so, for example, everybody in Colorado who's been participating in the system conservation pilot program, those are being approved by the Water Conservation Board. Those projects are that their historical consumptive use is not being harmed by using a crop that grows less in those years. So, but I mean, I've talked with some people, well, if your intention is to farm as long as possible, then you're not really concerned about damaging the long-term value of your water right in that regard. But I guess back to like really looking at production and facilities, an issue that I've been running into lately is, well, where do you find funding available to invest in this type of infrastructure? I was working with a gentleman up in Larimer County who was trying to grow his safflower oil processing facility. He couldn't even get a loan from a bank. And I know a similar group in the Rio Grande Basin was doing the same with a rye processing facility. A lot of banks, they want to see an investment sooner. And a lot of the grant funds out there, even at the federal level, that seem like they'd be for infrastructure, they're not. And there's very few opportunities for this. And I think that we're like, for example, I'm looking at this large tranche of funding coming through the upper Colorado River Basin. And we're really going to have to, I think, convince them why building a processing facility in Montezuma County, Colorado is going to decrease water use, or a crushing facility in another area. So I will wrap up. I'm almost done here. So just to give you an idea of some of the other projects that we're involved with, and I think Landon will also talk about some of the works he's in. I mean, we have people this year just starting to grow kernza in Rio Grande and Bent counties in Colorado, crested wheatgrass in Larimer County. We have a ranch in Montezuma County that's going to be experimenting with pretty much everything. Camelina in Mesa County, a really promising crop. It's an oilseed crop. And then cowpeas for forage and human consumption in Otero and Phillips County. And then this fall, we'll be accepting applications again for similar projects for 2025. We work with people. The application is pretty simple. We work with people on that. We help them put together a budget. Myself and Phil Brink did a lot of that. And if you're interested, just contact us now, and we can work on that. All right, Jake, I think I'll wrap up right there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. Thanks for sharing all that information. Cal really is doing some amazing work across the state, and we're excited to see the results of those projects. And yeah, to anyone out there in the audience that might be interested in pursuing similar work, definitely get in touch with Greg. I'm happy to facilitate an intro or provide that contact information there if you missed it. So with that being said, I'd like to pass things over to our second speaker here, Landon Wilson, to share his stories from Montezuma County, where he's experimenting with these alternative forages. So Landon, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you. Right there. Sorry. Okay. So my name is Landon Wilson, and I have my dad here. We're both from Montezuma County, specifically Pleasant View, Colorado. And we were asked to present some of the insights or experiments that we've done here as in regards to alternative forages. So just a little bit about us. We farm 2,000 acres, primarily alfalfa. We do ship our alfalfa to dairies in Texas and New Mexico. As Greg kind of mentioned, there's not really a whole lot of feedlots or dairies in our area, so we have to ship it to Texas and New Mexico. I was born and raised in Pleasant View, and my dad was as well. I went to school at BYU, Idaho, and received my Bachelor's of Science degree in Ag Business with a minor in agronomy. I bought my first piece of farm ground in 2017 when I was still in college. So I guess you could say that's when I officially started farming. But I've been farming with my dad ever since I was young.
Hey, I'm Brian Wilson. I was raised here in Pleasant View and went to college at CSU in Fort Collins, again with agribusiness from then. So I've been farming for 39 years. One reason I came back to farm was the McPhee project. The Dolores Water Project was coming into production in the late 80s when I graduated from college in the mid 80s. So that was a positive thing to me to come back to be able to farm. As we later go and show you that water's been a big issue for all of us. And so it's been a challenge to make it work and to keep the farm in good numbers.
So just to kind of give you a background, our water does come from the Dolores River. It is stored in the McPhee Reservoir. And each year, as the majority of us on the western U.S., we rely a lot on the snowpack and the runoff from the river. So the Dolores project in itself irrigates roughly around 63,000 acres. 29,000 of that is north of Cortez. And then you've got Montezuma Valley Irrigation Company, where they have 26,000. And then, as Greg previously mentioned, the Ute Farm and Ranch, they have 7,700 acres that they irrigate as well. So last 5 years of farming have been up and down. It's been hit and miss. In 2019, we had a pretty good snowpack, really good winter, good runoff and everything. So that was able to fill the reservoir and give us water and a full allocation, which our allocation is 22.1 inches every year per acre. And so 2019, we got full allocation. The winter of 2020 wasn't that good, but thanks to the carryover and runoff from 2019, we were able to have a full allocation as well in 2020. But basically, because we drained the lake in 2020 and we had a drier winter in 21, it really cut our allocation short. So of those 22 inches, we were only able to receive 1.7 inches, which really hurt us. I don't know.
It's one of the worst. I thought 2002 was bad. We received 6 inches in 2002. I didn't think we'd get any worse than that. And then 2021 came along and hit us with 1.7 inches. So it was quite an eye-opening experience.
Yeah. So in 2022 was a little bit better. We got some snow, but we still were only able to receive 9.2 inches. So 21 and 22 were really a big wake-up call for us. And then obviously 23 had a good winter, had a good runoff, able to fill the lake. We had a full allocation, and thanks to the carryover from last year, we have a full allocation this year as well in 2024. 2025, we'll wait and see. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we get some rain. But with all of this shortages of water, it kind of put us in a bind. We didn't know what to do. Alfalfa, it consumes a lot of water. It kind of gets a bad name in the media. It's a good crop. I'm not going to lie. It's a good crop. But it consumes a lot of water. It yields good. It tests high. If we had our choice, we would sell alfalfa and grow alfalfa all the time. But in water shortage years, this was not the option for us. In 2021, specifically, so we have 9 pivots and 10 or 12 side rolls, and we were only able to water 2 pivots for 2 weeks. That's how rough our summer was. We were basically done irrigating by the 1st of July. So we got to thinking, okay, so what are some other crops that require less water but give us the same amount of return in income? Because as a farmer, we gotta pay our bills, and we gotta make the most money that we can to pay those bills. And we also didn't want to switch equipment. Farming, yes, there are some pieces of equipment that you can do several tasks with, but with haying, it's very specific. And so we didn't want to go out and buy new equipment for a different crop. And so the solution for us was alternative forages. Just to clarify, this is nothing new. Barley, wheat, triticale, it's nothing new. It just fit us for our situation with the limited water that we were able to receive. So wheat and other similar grain crops usually take around 16 to 20 inches of water to get a decent tonnage off of it, which is half of what alfalfa does. In terms of yield as well, alfalfa, we're able to get 3 cuttings and we average right around 3.5 to 4 ton an acre of alfalfa. But whenever we raise the forage hay, we were able to get 2.5 to 3 ton to the acre. Not quite as good as alfalfa, but still decent. And obviously these crops, alternative forages, yielded more than grain, wheat for grain. And so that was our thinking behind it. So this is kind of just a brief overview financially for us. The yield and the price per ton is accurate. Acres are a little bit off. But in 2022, we were able to basically grow 130 acres of 3-way mix, which was beardless barley, beardless wheat, and oats. And we were able to get 2.65 ton off of that per the acre. So we were able to net right around $75,000. And as you can see, alfalfa still makes more money. We were able to get more per ton for the alfalfa. We had done 130 acres of alfalfa. We would have gotten 120,000 off of that field. So forage, isn't as good as alfalfa, but we were still able to make money off of it. And just to compare this, our forage hay to grain in 2023, we were able to grow 130 acres of triticale at 3.3 ton to the acre. And we only were able to receive 130 a ton. And I'll let my dad explain a little bit about the price. But to compare wheat for grain, 110 acres, 80 bushel, and 585, we still came out better selling forage hay than we did doing grain. And wheat grain and forage hay required the same amount of water. So for us, growing forage was better.
So the reason for the 130 a ton was some of the neighbors have done this, and as we were doing it, they all jumped on the same bandwagon. So a lot of the neighbors all grew this forage for hay, and we oversupplied the market quite readily and rapidly. Again, no feedlots type of a thing in the area. We could ship it to dairies. The shipping cost was tremendous to go to Texas, and hence, the difference in the price of per ton. But it was successful, although again, the true motto of supply and demand came into play. And so, what we thought was the golden answer turned out to be, yes, it's an answer, but maybe not as golden as we had hoped for year in and year out.
And so these are some of the forage varieties that we've grown and have had some success with. First one was three-way mix, which beardless barley, beardless wheat, and oats. We were able to get roughly around 2.5 tons to the acre on that. Five-way mix had beardless wheat, beardless barley, oats, triticale, and cowpeas. And that was probably one of our higher yielding mixes, was that one. Triticale is pretty similar to the three-way mix. Your beardless wheat and oats are as well. It is important to keep in mind the nitrates. We had 1,200 bales of high nitrate hay that we had a hard time getting rid of. So that is the other downside of these alternative forages, is the potential of nitrates. And we still, people say, oh, it's because you fertilized, oh, it was drought stress. No, none of those factors came into play for us. We don't know why it tested high in nitrate. And other varieties that we have experimented with has been sandfoin and kernza as well. There are other alternative forage varieties, but as farmers, it doesn't make sense for us financially to grow 130 acres of kernza and not be able to get rid of that crop.
Like Greg had commented, that is one of the biggest things that we do need help with, is marketing or storage. Or yes, we may be able to grow them, but again, if we have no place to take them, it does us no good to be able to raise them.
And there's research into some of these crops that are still in the research phases, but it's hard for us to jump on the bandwagon and grow something if there is no market for us. If we can't get rid of the crop easily, it's hard for us. So we have worked with Kawa. We do appreciate them, and like Greg said, if you want to experiment with the crop, they are a good avenue or a good source to do that through, and we do appreciate them. But that's just kind of a little brief overview of what we do down here in Southwest Colorado, and we're always willing and open to expand and learn and try out other varieties. So if any other people have had any other success with any other forages, by all means, please contact us, and we appreciate it. So.
Landon and Brian, thank you both so much for sharing your story and joining us today. I know it's a crazy time of year, so really appreciate you guys taking an hour out of your day. I do encourage everyone to keep an eye on the chat as Morgan continues to share resources, and please do continue to use the Q&A function for any questions you might have for our speakers. We'll get to those questions here briefly after our last presentation, which now brings us to Phil Brink to share his perspectives on the science and economics of this issue area. So Phil, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. It's good to be with you today. I am Phil Brink, and appreciated Greg's intro because he saved me some time. I am going to be talking with you about a specific project that we have been involved with kind of since the beginning of the Ag Drought Resilience Project. And this is a project that involves specifically that's those sod-bound conditions that we can get in those high mountain meadows. We typically see that when, excuse me here, I'm trying to do a couple things. We typically see that under the circumstances where we've got a higher elevation meadow and we have an irrigated, whether it's flood irrigation or it's in a center pivot, and that meadow tends to be hayed, and then maybe they regrow it and then they'll graze it a little bit in the fall. But those are kind of the conditions where oftentimes we see these sod-bound conditions develop, where the smooth brome, which tends to be in a lot of these mixes, gets established, and it is a very aggressive plant, and it will tend to dominate if given enough time. And so what happens is that because it is so aggressive and it can form this dense mat. And let me just stop here and ask the question: are you guys seeing this screen on the side, or is it just me?
No, we're good, Phil. We've got a full screen of your slides.
Okay. All right. So you can see by this photo here, and this is at the facility. This is a ranch just south of Meeker, and this is after we did some ripping and tilling, and you can see what this sod looks like. It's really just a biomat. There's very little soil here. It's primarily just roots, and then there's some grass on the other side if you flip it over. But that's what tends to happen. And CSU did studies for many years trying to figure out what the best way is to improve species diversity in these brome-dominated fields. And they tried a lot of things: overseeding, interseeding, even strip tilling, and none of those things tended to work after a few years. The smooth brome just kind of grows back in and crowds them out. What does work is when you actually get out the heavy artillery and start really ripping that sod up. And so that is kind of what we did here. Is you could spray it multiple times, and sometimes that will work, but this landowner decided that we wanted to go ahead and use tillage and then plant some interim crops. And so that's what we started on last year, and we're in our second year now, and I'll get into what that has looked like so far. But the whole idea of the Ag Drought Resilience Project is to improve drought resilience on the farm and ranch. And so for this project, our objectives were to eliminate those sod-bound conditions and improve our species diversity, with the hope that that was going to improve our drought resilience as well as yield, and then maintain that same or even higher quality forage, and maybe reduce fertilizer needs as well. So we'll see over time how well that happens. But this is the set of baseline conditions that we started with. This rancher has tended to apply around 180 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer per acre, and he generally has good water, so that's not usually a huge problem. As I mentioned, this is a center pivot irrigated field, and he typically applies 16 to 20 inches of irrigation water. His yield is not something that he's terribly happy about. He gets 2 to 2.5 tons per acre, typically. Sometimes that'll be a little higher, sometimes lower, depends on the year. But he does, after he's hayed, allow that to grow back, and then he grazes in the fall for about 45 days. And so that does add to the total yield. So we figured that's about 0.3 to 0.5 additional tons of production. So you can add that to that 2.5. So on a good year, he might produce 3 tons per acre. We have, under the center pivot irrigated fields, lots of land. He chose a 13-acre parcel, and then right beside that, we kind of call a 17-acre parcel the control, but really the whole rest of the field is the control because the soils are the same. So in year one here, as I mentioned, he decided to rip this up, and you see what that looked like after a couple passes with a disc and a ripper. So it really was an incredibly destructive process. And when you look at what that sod has kind of turned into, it's the kind of stuff that you would roll out in a suburban landscape. It really came out in strips like that. It was kind of amazing and surprising just how well that held together and just how shallow those roots were. So that was kind of an educational and costly process. After the ripping and tilling and chiseling, we had a really, really rough surface, and it was not enough that you could plant into. So he ended up getting a power harrow and hooking a drill on behind that, and that's what he used to ultimately seed it. It was still rough, but it was enough to get things in the ground, and he actually had a pretty good yield. But if you just down at the bottom of the screen, you see the total cost there on a per acre basis. That worked out to be about $420 that first year to get that in the ground and established. So what did it look like from a harvest standpoint? Well, it was probably not quite as high as he would have liked. He did plant it late. This was planted June 10th. He got 1.7 tons per acre. And this was this barley pea mix. And the peas kind of started out good, but then the barley started growing, and you really couldn't find the peas. So visually, the peas seemed minimal, and he really didn't think that the peas contributed much. The wildlife and the birds really liked it. And then when he grazed it in the fall, the cattle enjoyed it as well. One thing he found after he harvested, there was still probably more smooth brome than he thought was left. He estimated there was probably maybe 30% left. But as we went through the winter and got into this spring, some of that smooth brome came back. And so it goes into just how sturdy and stubborn this plant is to get rid of. But so this year now we've started again with our tillage. We've switched up a little bit on our crops. We still have the barley, but now we're using, instead of the peas, sainfoin and clover. And we'll see how that does. But because he had done that tillage last year, it mellowed the soil a bit, so the tillage costs were not quite as high. This year he used a tumbler aeration seeder, and this is kind of like a tool that will aerate, seed, and cultipack all at the same time, and it worked really well. The seed bed was much more attractive visually, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get more density in our stand here. So the cost was a little bit lower this year, $262 per acre. And you can see down that lower right, the upper right shows pre-planting. This was in first part of May. And then in the lower photo, you see this picture was taken about the 6th of June, and that crop was planted about 3 weeks prior. So it's kind of getting going. He didn't have too much trouble with weeds, probably no more than you would expect. So the control field, this is a field just adjacent to the one we looked at, and we have soil moisture probes in both of these fields, and this in the foreground here is the area where the soil moisture probe is located in this field. And so this last year in the spring, we pulled soil samples, and the lab did not call for any nitrogen to be applied, and they called for about 34 pounds of phosphorus to be applied. He actually was a little bit concerned that that would be too low, but he did go with half of his normal fertilization rate. And the yield last year turned out to be 1.8 tons per acre, which is, as I showed earlier, a bit low. And so he's wondering, was it because of the fertilizer or was it something else? He did have another field that was about the same, but the others were higher. Now, this year, we pulled soil samples again, and based on the lab's recommendation, he dropped the phosphorus application down to 62 pounds of P. And then he, even though the lab did not recommend any nitrogen, he did put on about 18 pounds. So it's not very much, but just hopefully trying to get the plants started. We pulled leaf samples from this control field just to see how they were doing. This was about 3 weeks after that liquid fertilizer was applied, and everything looks really good. Everything's in the sufficient category or even in the high category for the sulfur. So far, so good. We'll pull leaf samples again next month and see how things are progressing. But this is something that producers are always concerned about. If you change up your process and it's worked reasonably well in the past, it's always concerned that you're going to crash on your yield. And so most people like to kind of wade into that rather than diving in. And if they're going to reduce their application of fertilizer, they want to kind of slowly do it and ratchet it down rather than just cutting it. So what do the soil tests look like? On the upper right photo, this is both the treatment field and the control field, and then the lower right photo is the control field. But kind of interesting results on this, what we call the transition field. So in the spring of 23 last year, we pulled samples, and we had about 25 pounds of nitrate as N, some phosphorus and organic matter, about what you would expect for a meadow that historically has never been tilled. So pretty high levels of organic matter. And then in the fall, we grew that barley and pea mix. Our nitrate dropped off, and so did our organic matter, clear down to almost a percentage. So fast forward to this spring, sampled early May, and now we see something really interesting happening. We see this 96 pounds, excuse me, of nitrate, and that was a big surprise. But we also saw this reduction again, sorry, of the organic matter. And so we're wondering if our peas actually did more than we expected based on visual evaluation, if they in fact were able to contribute a fair bit of nitrogen through fixation, or if that is primarily from the oxidation of the organic matter and the rapid kind of accelerated process of mineralization into nitrate. Maybe a combination of those two. I think it's probably a little early to tell, but it's going to be interesting to see what this fall test results yields. Then over on the control field side, the soil nitrogen varied. Our phosphorus was pretty steady, but we did see a lot of variability in organic matter. And one of the interesting things is we go through from last fall and then to this spring is he had not applied any fertilizer after harvest and after grazing last fall on this field. And yet we see the nitrate as nitrogen level jump by 30 pounds. So why is that? Well, we see also a pretty dramatic decline in organic matter, if that's real. A little skeptical as to whether we had that kind of a decline. Why that might be? Was it because he didn't add fertilizer, and so we had a lot more mineralization of that organic matter because those plants were demanding some nitrogen, or is that a fluke? Not sure at this point, but it's going to be again interesting to see what we find this fall. So year 3, after this year, probably this fall on the transition field, then he's going to look at that and decide whether he wants to go ahead and plant what we call our final mix. And that's these 8 types of forages you see here on the table on the right. And he may do it this fall, or he may wait until winter or spring. It's just going to be his call at that time and what he thinks is kind of the best way to go. But so we have 4 types of grasses and then 4 legumes in that mix. And again, the hope is that it will end up, once established, being more drought resilient, more productive, requiring of no more fertilizer or water than he currently is using. So cost-wise, this is the past 2 years, so last year and this year. Just simple calculations here based on the tillage and seed costs, and then an estimate for year 3 as to what that would look like for establishing this new forage mix. And we come up with about $946 per acre, we think, to get that established. That doesn't include any excess weed control costs. You're always going to have some, but there might be a little higher weed control costs associated with establishing these new varieties. But if we just kind of do a simple cost benefit analysis, what does that look like? If the new forage yields 1 ton per acre per year more than the control field, and that's a big if, of course, but let's just say that it does, if we're not having to apply any additional water or fertilizer, and hay averages $200 a ton over the next several years. I know that's high for right now, but hay does fluctuate, and we've seen much higher than that in the past, not so distant past. So again, using that figure of $946 per acre, if our benefit works out to be an additional ton or the equivalent of $200 per acre per year, then we just divide that, and our payback time becomes 5 years. So plus or minus, of course, but that doesn't look too bad. And it might be something that, if this works out the way we hope it will, other ranchers are going to look at as an approach that will be reasonably economical. So I just wanted to, Greg kind of touched on some of the other projects. Wanted to just mention that we do have a couple of different bale grazing projects, and those are designed to improve soil quality. And these were in areas where we've got a lot of soil salinity. So we're trying to essentially improve our soil quality by increasing organic matter through that bale grazing and negate the effects of that salinity. I also have an intensive rotational grazing versus haying trial going on, and then furrow irrigation timing based on soil moisture probes. We're doing some of that, and that's producing some interesting results. Stubble height differences, leaving higher stubble and seeing what that results in terms of soil moisture differences. Biochar and compost versus just compost, what are the differences you see both in organic matter and then in yield? Interrow corn and milo versus just corn is kind of an interesting one where we're looking at, are there any moisture differences? What are the yields going to look like ultimately? And then biochar injection. And that is a project that got started last year over in the Grand Valley. I know Michael Lobato's on this webinar, and he has been instrumental in leading that effort. And it is also yielding some pretty interesting results. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Jake.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Phil, for sharing your work with us. And thank you to our other speakers here today, Greg and Landon and Brian. You each made a lot of valuable points and shared a lot of good stories and insights. So really hope that your words have inspired folks to ask questions that we can now get to. As a reminder, please use the Q&A function for any questions you might have. And we'll try to answer all your questions right now, but in the event that we don't get to them all, we will be following up with you via email. So don't be shy. Now's your chance to reach out and get in touch with the folks that you just heard present. So with that being said, let's start with a question here for the Wilsons. Have Landon and Brian considered joining a hay exchange network, something like agrahayexchange.com or other networks?
No. We've done, I mean, we worked through brokers and we've tried, different area brokers type of a thing, but not a hay exchange, no. The Colorado does have Colorado Hay.
CSU
directory.
has a hay directory.
And I have, and there's online auctions, but no, we haven't tried an exchange. Online auctions, Facebook, try and keep up, with kind of the prices of hay and where they're at and so on. But I appreciate the information on the exchange.
Great. Thanks, guys. Greg, anything to add?
Yeah, just on that. And I think with like Landon and Brian and like their neighbors, when you're shipping alfalfa, the geographic areas like this, and all of a sudden with these other crops, it shrinks. And I feel like the question is, in that area, is the demand there? That'd be great if we can find people in Colorado, Utah, and is that all it takes? I hope that would be easy, but I suspect we'd have to build the demand, but I'm not sure of the answer. That would be great to really go through like those directories and identify, is there enough demand in there? We just need to build the connections, or is it not there?
Some of it. So, like the triticale has become more popular with the dairies just because of the feed value and less nitrates, less problems with it. And so some of that, just takes time for them to experiment and kind of find out. So yes, it is improving that marketing area, and it just takes some time. But yes, I certainly think we're kind of isolated here as far as Southwest Colorado, and getting, the only way we can get things out is by trucking. And so it's limiting. There's no railroad. There's, obviously no ships, no kind of a thing to get any kind of commodities out of here. So it's a bigger picture to help the whole marketing issue.
Yeah, Brian, I think the time issue is good, where I'm in a vegetable farm right outside of Denver, and it took 3 years before I found like my first wholesaler. And you'd think that would be a piece. It takes time for these. It's almost luck or random when it works.
Yeah, lots to consider there, guys. Thanks for taking that one head on. Greg, while we've got you talking here, you briefly mentioned it in the context of Colorado, but I am curious to know how other states might handle water right protections when consumptive use changes.
Oh, I know enough to know that I couldn't talk about other states. Yeah, the Colorado water law is enough for me. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, plenty more to explore there too. Well, we've reached the top of the hour here, but we do have some outstanding questions that I'll be in touch with the Wilsons and Greg and Phil, and we'll get all your questions answered, and we'll follow up via email. But before we sign off here again today, just wanted to say a few brief words. A huge thank you to our speakers here today. And thank you to all for joining us on this Friday afternoon. As a reminder, we will be in touch next week with any answers to your questions, the recording of this webinar, the written recap, all the information that Morgan has shared through the chat. So do keep your eyes on your inbox for that. And we really hope you can join us again on July 26th for our next water webinar, where we will be exploring the connections between forests and watersheds. You can register for that and other WLA events using the link that you just found in the chat there. And lastly, we do want to thank the Gates Family Foundation for their support of this webinar series, and also others who support our water work more broadly, including Conscience Bay Research, the Lohr Foundation, and the Walton Family Foundation. So with that being said, thank you all again for joining us today, and hope you have a great weekend. Thanks again.